You have just read a bit more about the constructivist theory of teaching. As you watch this video, keep the following questions in the back of your mind. In what ways am I already using constructivist teaching methods in my classroom? What are the benefits and drawbacks of this method? At heart, constructivism is a theory about how people learn. It says that instead of trying to force yourself to memorize something, the best way to learn is to actively try a concept out, and then reflect on that experience. Constructivist teaching involves tying new concepts to things you already know. This is a hands-on and active approach to learning that gives students the freedom they need to experiment, test out, and become the leaders of their own learning. And after trying these new concepts out, students take time or reflect on them. In other words, this approach emphasizes teaching students how to learn. This does not mean the teacher becomes passive or sits off to the side while students run wild in the classroom. In fact, constructivist teaching requires teachers to take a very active role in shaping their students' experiences. Teachers must plan these hands-on experiences in advance and understand the different biases and learning styles of their students in order to make sure students find the activities interesting. They must be patient enough to let students experiment, but active enough to help gently nudge students down the right path so that they can come to useful conclusions during a lesson. In this sense, the teacher is a facilitator or a coach who helps students find the right path independently instead of telling them exactly where to go. In traditional classrooms, the expert teacher pours knowledge into the students while students work hard to memorize that knowledge. But in a constructivist classroom, students are actively making or constructing the meaning of this information. The material becomes immediately relevant to them because they are being asked to immediately use it. And this means students are more likely to remember what they learned without having to force themselves to sit down and memorize it. Constructivist classrooms can look very busy. Students are usually working in groups, talking out ideas, and using materials to experiment. The teacher generally does not stand at the head of the classroom giving information, but instead walks from group to group asking important questions that help guide students toward the answers. In no way does the teacher simply provide the answers. This is the key to constructivist learning. Let's take a look at an example of a classroom where constructivist teaching is happening. In this scenario, the teacher is helping students learn about gravity. She has asked students to figure out an answer to these questions. Do heavy items fall faster than lighter items? Why or why not? As we look in the room, we see 30 students divided into groups of 5 or 6 different workstations. Each workstation has a stopwatch, as well as a ruler, a rock, a twig, a piece of paper, a rubber band, a coin, and a dollar bill. Now, what the teacher wants the students to learn is that the weight of the items does not affect the speed, but that surface area will affect speed. Items with a larger surface area will fall slower than items with a smaller surface area, thanks to resistance when falling. But because this is a constructivist approach, this is not something the teacher will simply tell her students. They have to figure it out for themselves. For about a half an hour, students will experiment dropping items from a height marked on the ruler and timing how long it takes them to fall. The teacher will go around and help make sure students are dropping items from the same height and asking them what they have noticed so far. Some students might notice that the dollar bill and piece of paper fell slower. In this case, the teacher can ask, "And why do you think this is the case?" Some students might not have done the experiment correctly or might have overlooked the fact that the paper items fall slower. In this case, the teacher might say, "Are you sure about that? I'd give it another try." Or, "That's interesting. The students at the station over there got a different result. Maybe you want to talk to them and compare answers." The teacher's role is to help guide students through any issues they might be having with the experiment and try to help them reflect on the information they are getting so they can better understand it. Constructivist teaching gives teachers more opportunities to assess their students. You can, of course, issue a test to make sure students have learned the concept. But remember, constructivism is about more than memorizing content. It is about teaching students how to learn and how to become lifelong leaders of their own learning. And this means you should also think about assessing how active students are in the experiments, how well they are communicating, whether they are staying on task or letting themselves get distracted, and how engaged they are in reflecting on what they've learned. Remember, conducting an experiment is not enough to make sure students really learn a concept. A key part of this approach is reflecting on the information and making meaning out of it. Let's review. In this lesson, you learned about the constructivist teaching approach. You learned that constructivism is a theory about learning that says the best way to learn something is to make meaning out of it. This is done through hands-on experimentation and reflection. Under this approach, the role of the teacher is to help create exercises and experiments that help students explore a particular concept, ask guiding questions, help students stay on topic, and help them reflect on what they have learned in order to give it meaning. The role of the students is to become the drivers of their own learning experience. They conduct hands-on experiments, try out new ideas, and use what they already know as a way to investigate these new concepts. You learn that when assessing constructivist teaching approaches, teachers can use tests as well as observations of behavior, student engagement, communication, concentration, and reflection. Remember the questions that you asked yourself at the beginning of this video? Now is a good time to answer these questions. Once you have done that, apply your answers to the themes of this video.